The scene begins with Macbeth and Fleance talking about the night, while walking within Macbeth's home. Macbeth arrives, and Banquo and him begin to discuss the Weird Sisters and their prophecies, starting on Banquo's behalf, to which Macbeth lies, saying he hasn't thought of them much. Later on, the father and son leave, and Macbeth begins to have a vision of a dagger on the floor in front of him, while he thinks of doing the deed that is killing Duncan. He questions if it is real or not, as it leads towards Duncan's room and then sees it turn bloody, while he talks of the supernaturalness of the night. As the bell rings, telling him the chamberlains are sleeping, he walks to Duncan.
From the mind of Shakespeare, we analyze this passage.
In Act 2, Scene 1 of William Shakespeare's Macbeth, the theme of appearance versus reality is present as Macbeth believes to see a dagger leading him on the decision to kill Duncan. As soon as his servants leave, Macbeth sees the weapon shining in the darkness of the hallway, so lifelike he grabs for it, saying, "Let me clutch thee." This passage is supposed to portray his inner battle on whether his fate should be left alone or to be taken into his own hands for his ambitious pursuit. Such as where he says the handle towards my hand in Act 2, Scene 1, line 35, could either mean that he simply imagines it so, or that instead of the point facing him, it's in the direction as if he yields it. Also, the double meaning of whether Macbeth simply means a dagger of the mind, conjured up in his mind, or meaning that it is tormenting him, foreshadowing how this deed will keep him restless. Later, he feels feverish, saying that he has a heat-oppressed brain, either meaning he feels sick or that the guilt is too much. This is introducing the motif of sleep in the line, "Wicked dreams abuse the curtained sleep," figuratively meaning innocence, and the lack of it to say that the characters will be restless because of ongoing nightmares, showing their guilt. And curtained, as in his perspective is narrowing and is curtained by his ambitious pursuit. While trying to confront his guilty conscience, the supernatural aspect of the night brings in the setting that this is a night of darkness and evil. This atmosphere has been introduced at the very beginning of the play, when the Weird Sisters meet and make a prophecy in Act 1, Scene 1, as well as during the aftermath of the war, when telling Macbeth of his virtuous future in Act 1, Scene 3. Specifically, when speaking of Tarquin's ravishing strides towards his design, Shakespeare is referring to Tarquin, the Proud, who, like Macbeth, was a tyrannical ruler who did a very evil deed to gain his power. And by saying ravishing strides, he means that in a way that he admires the tyrant and is using the story's evil energy to successfully do the deed. Oh, and here's the paper, Malika.
Thank you, Armita. Now that we have analyzed the diction of the passage, let's analyze the syntax and structure. The passage starts off with a rhyming couplet, perhaps signifying the starting of an important passage. From the first two lines of the passage, me, see, thee all rhyme. There are long flowing rhymes indicating Macbeth is calm while saying the dialogue. However, Macbeth soon starts to panic after realizing he is already facing a consequence for his bad choice of planning to kill the god-chosen king, which can be seen as the sentences become short and choppy. Though finally Macbeth calms down as he talks to himself about how it is merely an illusion and can do no harm to him. As the passage progresses, Macbeth's lines start to flow and rhyme again as if he is regaining his lost tranquility and motivation. The climax is when the bell rings and Macbeth says, "I go and it is done. The bell invites me," in line 63. As the reader nears the climax, more lines are written in iambic pentameters and rhyme more to build up flow and speed for the climax. Consequently, when the climax in which Duncan's death becomes present, the flow is broken from his sudden death, giving the reader the sense that this is an important scene unconsciously. The scene becomes the second event that provokes the turning point and Macbeth's downfall. The passage then ends with a rhyming couplet which signifies the end of an important passage and the nearing of the climax of the book itself. Here you go, Ree.
Thanks, dude.
Literal imagery and symbolism. In this well-known soliloquy, here the audience sees Macbeth going a little crazy here. You can see the consequences of the decision to kill Duncan already taking form. Macbeth conjures up an image of a dagger, so real that he tries to touch it. Macbeth's powerful imagination is what leads to his strong paranoia and suspicion later on in the play, as he says, "Oh, full of scorpions is my mind, dear wife," from Act 3, Scene 2, verse 39. The dagger can be interpreted as a double-edged sword in the sense that it will be used to kill Duncan, and as Macbeth says, dagger of the mind, it can be interpreted as a mental torture for Macbeth, a dagger in his mind. He was considered a fluid that could press onto the brain, causing fever and delirium. It symbolizes Macbeth's brain going insane, causing him to see hallucinations and delusions. Dudgeon Gouts of Blood is a literal imagery of Macbeth conjuring an image of blood appearing on the dagger, symbolizing what will happen after he kills Duncan. One half world refers to a world isolated and part of a larger world, and is literal imagery, as Macbeth is secluded in his own world, trying to kill Duncan while the rest of the people are sleeping. It also foreshadows how Macbeth will act in the future, being paranoid and suspicious. In Act 3, Scene 1, Lady Macbeth says to him, "How now, my lord? Why do you keep alone?" Curtain sleep is literal imagery, as in someone sleeping with drapery in the room they're sleeping in. It also symbolizes Duncan's ignorance of what is happening. The curtains represent his closed eyes, not seeing the view outside the windows. Wolf who howls his watch symbolizes the signal to kill Duncan. And that's it for me. Here you go. Let me dust it off a bit.
Yep, it's good to go.
Thanks, Ree. There's a lot of figurative imagery in this part of the play. This is majorly because Macbeth is talking to the dagger like a person, and this dagger is mentioned a lot in the passage and is directly spoken at. So this can be considered as one of the spirits from Act 4, Scene 1, who has possibly possessed Macbeth's train of thought with this dagger, which leads into the theme of appearance versus reality. The phrase heat oppressed brain represents the pressure of Macbeth having to do this action or not do this action. Heat has a hidden meaning of hell, as noted when young Seward says to Macbeth, "Though thou callest thyself a hotter name than any is in hell," in Act 5, Scene 7, lines 6 to 7. Hellish thoughts, therefore, are considered hot. The other line, words to the heat of deeds too cold breath gives, cold can equal Macbeth's cowardly and cautious words. In his talking is cooling his fire, and the fire is the villainous deed that he is about to commit. When Macbeth says the line, "Thou marshalest me the way that I was going," it represents that the dagger is guiding him, which also has a metaphor that this action is wiping away any self-control that Macbeth has, and is guiding him down the wrong path. Marshalist also shows that the dagger is having a mind of its own. And this leads back to our previous idea that there is a potential spirit who has created the hallucination of this dagger to confuse Macbeth. When Macbeth says, "moves like a ghost," that phrase contains a simile, "like a ghost," which means that the dagger is moving quietly. However, the word ghost here may have been chosen by Shakespeare to contribute to the grim setting. By having the word ghost foreshadow the ghost of Duncan, or the ghost of Banquo, Macduff's wife and children, young Seward, or even Macbeth's own ghost. Another thing to add is that this is the ghost of his actions that we are talking about, and how they may possibly haunt him in the future, such as in Act 5, Scene 1, when Lady Macbeth is washing her hands because she is frightened by her previous actions. Another reference to ghost is that it can represent Macbeth's previous personality after he commits this murder. And his change of personality is noted in Act 5, Scene 5, lines 9 to 15. In the words "nature seems dead," there is use of personification and pathetic fallacy. Nature is imitating the state that Duncan will soon be in at the end of the scene. The phrase "withered murder" can either mean a murder that has happened to an old man or an old person, or it has a hidden meaning that the murder is just destroying the killer mentally and just withering him away. When Macbeth says, "Now o'er the one half world nature seems dead, and wicked dreams abuse the curtained sleep," he is either talking about how only their side of the world is covered in night, and now everyone is asleep and probably having bad dreams, or Shakespeare is foreshadowing that Macbeth will never sleep again.
Shakespeare introduces us to this concept in Act 5, Scene 1, where Lady Macbeth is sleepwalking because she is haunted by this murder, and the many others that follow. The phrase one-half world can actually also relate to the spiritual world versus the human world, and this again leads back to the theme of appearance versus reality. Shakespeare may have also used the dagger to represent Macbeth himself. In the beginning of the passage, the dagger is clean, and the handle is pointing towards Macbeth's hand. This can represent Macbeth's personality, how he is a brave soldier and he is willing to fight for his king. However, later in the passage, Macbeth noticed gouts of blood upon the blade and its dudgeon, which can represent Macbeth's conscience after he does this murder. He is always thinking about this action and how he will be eternally damned into hell. Shakespeare comparing Macbeth to a dagger is similar to when Macbeth compares life to a brief candle. Act 5, Scene 5, line 23. There is a definite pattern of blood throughout this whole play. In this first passage, when Macbeth is talking about the gouts of blood upon the blade, and also when Lady Macbeth is trying to get the damned spot out of her hand, which is blood as well. Based on all our evidence, it is clear that the main theme in this passage is appearance versus reality. This is noted through
the abnormality of the knight shows pathetic fallacy. Nature acts different according to the evil of the bloody knight that he is doing, and foreshadows his business in multiple killings later in the book. This shows how the character's emotions and decisions play into how Macbeth reacts in this scene.
When Macbeth sees the dagger, which is not actually there in reality, it shows that he is already getting meshed between the two worlds of fantasy and reality. He is hallucinating in response to his extreme guilt of planning to murder the God-chosen king. He cannot think clearly anymore, and is already starting to slowly drift off into the world of fantasy in which he will soon believe himself to be almost immortal. This ties into the theme of appearance versus reality, which Shakespeare implies through Macbeth the most in this passage.
The dagger can be interpreted as a double-edged sword in the sense that it will be used to kill Duncan, and as Macbeth says, dagger of the mind. It can be interpreted as a mental torture for Macbeth, a dagger in his mind.
This dagger is mentioned a lot in the passage and is directly spoken at. So this can be considered as one of the spirits from Act 4, Scene 1, who has possibly possessed Macbeth's train of thought with this dagger, which leads into the theme of appearance versus reality. The phrase one-half world can actually also relate to the spiritual world as opposed to the human world, and this again leads back to the theme of appearance versus reality. Macbeth is clearly unsure of whether the dagger is truly there or not, and this is the one main reason as to why this passage revolves around appearance versus reality.